Solitaire Rose Radio, Episode 50. Interview with comic book writer and novelist Mike Baron. I talk a little in this episode about the first Mike Baron comic I read. I discovered his work right after high school. I graduated high school, and I'd heard about direct sales comics. I'd mailed away for some from time to time. But one of my friends said, "Hey, there's a comic shop in Galesburg." And I was living in Fairview, outside a town of 250 people. So we took a Sunday afternoon, we drove up, and there was this video store. And this was an early 80s video store, so they had the VCR that you could rent, and they had tapes, but they also had baseball cards, and they had comics. And the comics were kind of in the corner of the store. And they had the Marvel, they had the DC, but they had all these direct sales only books that I hadn't even heard of. There was Captain Victory by Jack Kirby. There was issues of the Comic Reader, which was this fanzine that was kind of like the TV guide for comics. Here's what's coming up. Here's what's out. Here's an article on this. But there was also a magazine-sized comic called Nexus, and it was the third issue, and it had a flexi disc in it. And I picked it up and I brought it home, and I put the flexi disc on the turntable and listened to that as I'm reading the comic, and I fell in love. I could go on and on about Steve Rude's art. Steve Rude is one of the premier artists in comics, and even back then, even his earliest work, you saw that this guy was doing something special. He was doing something unique. But the story also grabbed me, because it looked like a superhero book, but really it was a science fiction book. It's set in the future. The lead character, Nexus, is charged by an alien very inscrutable alien. You don't really understand this alien and why he does things, but he has chosen Nexus to execute mass murderers. And if he does not do this, he will suffer from debilitating headaches that will eventually kill him. So here was a comic unlike anything Marvel and DC had done, very innovative, very cool to look at, and I put a note in my head that buy anything by these two creators. Last summer, I was contacted by Mike Baron. Badger is coming back. I was a huge fan of Badger. I've talked about my love of that comic on the podcast, and it was one of the first comics that we reviewed. And me being a Badger fan, I loved it. So I told Mike Baron that I really enjoyed the book. We were giving it a good review. I really enjoyed it. Joe didn't know the characters much, so he was kind of on the fence. But I told Mike that when the comic finally comes out, I would like to sit down and interview you. And this is that interview. I hope you enjoy it.
Wonderful. We've been trying to set this up for a while, and we're doing it the day that Badger drops. My first question is actually going to be, I have been reading some of the Marvel black and white mags, one of which is pretty rare and obscure. It took me a while to get them all. It is a magazine called Comics Book that Dennis Kitchen put together for Marvel. It has an interesting history. And as I'm reading through, I see a very familiar name doing a text piece.
On the water pistol?
Yes. How did that come about? I know that you're originally from Wisconsin, and Dennis Kitchen was out of Wisconsin. How did that come about? Because as far as I know, that may be your first comic book credit.
Maybe. I was going to the University of Wisconsin, and I was interested in comics, and I'd heard about Dennis Kitchen, and there was a newspaper in Milwaukee. I can't think of its name, but somehow I was in touch with those guys. So one day Dennis came over to visit, a real tall guy, and we just started kicking it around, and we became friends. And so he asked me, well, I may have asked him, I forget, but I had all these crazy ideas. I had a huge water pistol collection. It's all plastic, and I used to modify them. And that's what the article was about, was how to modify a Park water pistol so that it shot a bigger squirt further. And the Park water pistols were the cream of the crop because they had little brass nozzles. But I have to say that water gun technology has far surpassed those items of years ago. You can get something more powerful than any Toys R Us.
And was that, now, you talked about how you were interested in comics. When were you bitten by the comics bug? What was the early comics where you went, I love this stuff, and this is what I want to do?
Well, I never consciously chose to enter comics until later in life, but it was Uncle Scrooge that got me started. I picked those up in Mitchell, South Dakota, and I was just blown away. I knew they were special, and I didn't know why. And then when I got to university, I met some guys who turned me on to Neil Adams and Steranko, and I looked at that stuff, and I thought, holy shit, I mean, these guys are, it's just way beyond normal comic book art, for which I was used. Neil Adams, the realism, and Steranko, the graphic brilliance, but they both had those. Neil is better at drawing the human figure, but Jim is sui generis. Just just a brilliant artist. I love his noir stuff. And that's how I got interested in comics. I was going to go off to more stuff I did for Kitchen, but I think I'll hold on that.
So from comics book to the first book I bought that had your name in it was Nexus #3 with the flexi disc. And I wanted to ask, what was your journey to that? Because I know that Capitol, if I'm remembering it right, Capitol Comics was a comic shop that also became a distributor and then a publisher.
No, they were never a shop. They were always just a distributor. And Milton John, who formed it, they'd worked in distribution for one of the older news agencies for a long time. So they knew what they were doing, and they loved pop culture. And they got it going. And meanwhile, completely independent of that, I was working at an insurance company when this editor I knew called me. And he said, "It's a guy down here trying to sell us his drawings. He draws just like you," which meant that I was trying to draw superheroes. So I got the guy's info, and I arranged to meet him on the steps of the student union. I went down there with Steve Rude. He opened up his portfolio. I forgot about drawing myself from that point on. But we had similar interests. He wanted to do comics but couldn't write. I wanted to do comics, so I couldn't draw, so we decided to team up. And the first thing we did was a story about some poor fool trying to go door to door in a dystopian future selling encyclopedias. And of course, this is our complete failure to envision stuff like the internet, because nobody has encyclopedias anymore. You can get anything you want on the internet until the giant Chinese electromagnetic pulse hits, and then we're all screwed, except for those of us with the encyclopedias. We'll be sitting pretty. So, and then we heard that Capitol wanted to get into publishing business, so we showed them that stuff, and Milton and John said, "Nah, it's nice, but we need a costume superhero." So I started to think about what would make for a compelling figure. And it occurred to me that if somebody died every time he showed up, well, that's compelling. And that was the genesis of Nexus, and then I had to find a rationale for him. He was an assassin of mass murderers, but not always a willing assassin of mass murderers, that he'd been raised by an insane alien to be the justice for his race, even though the alien was insane, and it was the alien's idea of justice. But that was all well and good, because the people he killed, for the most part, deserved it. And that's how we started. And that dude, when he just started exploding as an artist and filling the pages with all these incredible characters, many of whom were just afterthoughts that I brought forward because I found them so interesting.
And where did the idea for the flexi disc come from? Because quite honestly, this was I think it was like my second or third time in a comic shop. And the first 3 issues of Nexus from Capitol were magazine size. And here's one with the flexi disc. And I'm looking at it going, well, I got to buy that. I gotta buy that.
There's a guy named Dan, and his name is all over the credits. He came to Capitol and said, "Hey, we do radio theater. What do you think of this?" So we provide a soundtrack for your comic. And the boys thought, well, that's unique, that's different, let's do that. So they did it.
And then Capitol got out of publishing, and you went it over to First.
Right.
Where you had both Nexus and Badger. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about, Nexus and Badger are two very, very different books. Nexus is science fiction, very philosophy-based. Badger has mysticism and is kind of superhero humor-based. Now, that doesn't mean that things in Nexus weren't funny and stuff in Badger wasn't philosophical. But you kind of developed these two very different styles of your books. Did that help or hinder you as you went forward?
Well, everything helps. I was just moving by instinct in those days. I mean, I thought about the stories a lot and what I wanted to do with the characters, but it was mostly just instinct. And I would say upwards of 50 or 60 of each of those characters, 60 issues, I would write simply by sitting down with a legal pad and sketching each page out by hand, including all the characters and spaceships and kind of my crude, half-assed stick figure style, with all the dialogue and captions. And dude loved it, the editors loved it, because you could look at it at a glance and see everything that was happening on the page. It was an audio, it was a visual presentation. I had to stop doing that because my back hurt. It's funny because my approach to storytelling is so different now. I write elaborate outlines, and I think about them. I work on them for days and days, and when those are done, then I do the actual scripting.
I want to jump around because you talk about your writing style is different now. One of the things that you do now outside of comics is you write novels as well, Helmet Head, Scorpio. Has that informed your comic writing style and made it different, or does your comic writing style inform the prose style?
The novels are something I've always wanted to do, and finally I'm at that stage, but the novels make the comics much better. For instance, I'm adapting two of my novels into graphic novels for Atomic Horizon. One is Helmet Head. And Helmet Head, I wish I could write it over again. I'm not going to write it over again, but it's not my strongest effort. But the beauty of the graphic novel is I have a chance to correct all the flaws I saw in the novel. So the graphic novel is going to be a much stronger, tighter story. And I'm also adapting my novel, Biker, into a graphic novel. And nobody has ever seen anything like this. It's going to make people's heads explode. I know. I can just tell. It's a very realistic crime story about a reformed motorcycle hoodlum who's charged with finding a missing child, and it's going to take you places you never thought you would ever go in any medium.
Biker is one of those books that's on my Kindle that I have not gotten to yet. I think anybody who reads has the stack of books. But I did read Helmet Head, and one of the things that I really enjoyed about it was how you almost perfectly captured the small town.
Well, I know small towns. I grew up in Mitchell, South Dakota.
And one of the things about Badger was while it took place in
Wisconsin.
It took place in Wisconsin. There were a lot of sequences that did take place outside of cities, outside in small towns. Do you think that that's an area that a lot of comic books and novelists and other writers just kind of ignore now?
Well, I don't know. I'm not that widely read about that stuff, but we all write what we know, plus our imagination, and those settings are just suitable for Badger, who's a small-town guy. He comes from a little town up in northern Wisconsin called Box Elder. And I think, well, I don't know, but I know that I would prefer to live in a small town in the upper Midwest than on either coast, New York or Los Angeles. I lived in Boston for 7 years, and those are great places. I love the city. I love the energy. But for me, I like space and solitude and silence. And if you saw my house, you'd laugh because it's chock-a-block with dozens of other houses that look exactly like it. But it's a pretty quiet neighborhood, and I have good neighbors. But my urge is always to move further into the boondocks, and so is Badger's. I mean, he's got personality problems, and he would just as soon not be exposed to huge crowds and flashing lights. Oh,
Now, Badger.
Yeah, I just want to say something about Biker, that I just signed a deal with Liberty Island Press to publish all 4 of my Josh Pratt novels, and they'll be coming out in the next year and a half. There are 4 finished, and each one is more explosive than the last. And those, well, let's just say I'm happy with my work.
Well, good. So people will be able to buy them in print, and they'll be in bookstores and everything as well, right?
Yes, and eventually
right.
I'm looking to adapt them all into graphic novels. And as I said, these books are so they came out so well, covering the themes I wanted to do, and having the narrative voice. The narrative voice is all important. It's the narrative voice that grabs you by your throat and drags you through the book. I'm trying to write books that are impossible to put down, and I think I'm succeeding. So we'll see. I mean, they all lend themselves to graphic novel interpretation, and people are going to see relationship and depth of character as has never been revealed before.
One of the things as you talk about Badger, which has come back, and by the time this airs and is available for people, it will have been out for a week or 2. It was a character who had multiple personality disorder,
right,
which has become kind of a controversial psychological diagnosis.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s, it was a big thing. And I wanted to ask about your research into it because I was a psychology student. And I remember going through and you hit all the right points from the current DSM, from the current research. How much research did you do to make the characters more realistic?
Oh, quite a bit. It started when I read The Minds of Billy Milligan by Daniel Keyes, and then I started seeking out other texts on multiple personality disorder. As I'm sure you know, it comes and goes. Right now, they say there's no such thing, and I don't know. But what I do know is that the human mind can conceive of anything, and it will always surprise you. And there's just no limits to how far the human mind will go in any direction, whether a good direction or a bad direction. So I think the most open-minded psychologist would admit that the possibility of multiples is certainly there. But right now they're out of fashion.
Yes. Right now, I think they say that it's severe bipolar disorder, and it's not multiple personalities. It's more that the person has such severe reaction. But as with a lot of things psychological, because it's not a pure science. It's not, okay, we do this, we test it over and over and over again. Things can swing back and forth with diagnosis. Did you ever worry that you were dealing with very serious subject matter and juxtaposing it with both the humor of Badger and also the sort of outlandish, I can't even think of the proper word for Ham as a character, because
well,
it's amazing to me that it all meshed, because if you look at it, it shouldn't mix.
Let me explain about Ham. I met Jeff Butler, and this was after I got Nexus going. I said, Jeff, let's do something for Capitol. And he said, great. And I said, well, Jeff, what do you want to draw? And he says, well, I love medieval stuff, castles. So I did this 12-page story about a weather wizard, a Welsh wizard, a druid priest, who was so obnoxious in the 6th century that all the other priests got together and put a spell on him and made him unconscious. And then they hired some Vikings to row him out and sail him out to the edge of the world and drop him off the edge of the world. But they didn't come to the edge of the world. They came to America, and they carried Ham's comatose body as far inland as they could get, which was Wisconsin, and then they buried him there. So we showed this to John and Milton. He says, no, man, no, we don't want any druids. We want a costume crime fighter. And Jeff says, well, I'm not going to waste these pages. So fine, I'll use the 12 pages and then we'll get into Badger. But as far as the seriousness of Badger, I dealt with that in a very serious way when I did the Shattered Mirror for Dark Horse with Jill Thompson, in which we explored the origins of his multiple personality disorder in detail. And of course, if you know about this, it's usually the result of severe childhood trauma, which a child's mind cannot simply absorb what's happening to them. So they seek emergency valves, they seek ways out, and one of them is to create other personalities that aren't stuck in that situation.
And when Shattered Mirror came out, at the exact same time, if I remember right, was the Zen Pop Funny Animal Badger story.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, showing the juxtaposition of the serious and the bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever worry about mixing those elements? Do you ever think that you might go too far in one and lose the audience?
No.
Or is one kind of the safety valve for the other?
No. I should, I have a pretty good sense of story these days, and I know what'll work and what won't.
Okay.
So it just doesn't worry me.
Now, you worked these series through, and then when First went under, it seemed like they had a little trouble with Nexus and Badger landing somewhere. And while I don't want to get into all the legal silliness, because that would take, I don't know, 7-8 hours probably, what was the path to get Nexus and Badger back into print? Because
I don't think it was very difficult. Mike Richardson expressed an interest in it right away.
Well, that's good. But there were no legal issues from First going under, because other creators have talked about how...
Well, yeah, there were issues. In fact, we signed our rights away because we were stupid. I have to point out that Mike Richardson returned copyright and trademark to Steve Root and me in an unprecedented act of generosity that has never been repeated. As for First, they still have a proprietary interest in Badger, and that's good and bad. It's good because they have a reason to go forward with Badger and produce more Badger material, and it's bad because I can't do whatever I want. This last series, we worked on this for 6 months before we came up with a storyline that they found acceptable. And it's not that the other stories were bad, but it's just that First right now is angling to transmute these properties into other medium, most notably film. And I think that the first issue, have you read it?
Yes, we reviewed it on our podcast a while back.
That's right. That first issue is movie stuff.
That certainly makes a lot of sense. One of the things about this Badger miniseries, it is, and it's the dreaded word, if it's a reboot, you're starting over. As you're doing this starting over, were you able to, much like when you turn your novels into graphic novels, were you able to look at the early issues of Badger and say, all right, here's what I want to fix, here's kind of some bad directions? Or was it more, okay, I can just take it, do it in a new style?
Well, I didn't have to look at Badger. I know everything that happened. And to me, this is an opportunity to introduce him to a new generation. And I have no problems with reboots. We just rebooted Nexus for the third time with the dude's new strip, which is enormous. I mean, the thing is so big that it covered my coffee table. Have you seen the new strip? You probably haven't seen it.
I have not seen it yet. My co-host has gotten the first one in the mail and talked about how it was just monstrous.
Yeah, it is monstrous. All right, now I'm lost. What were we talking about?
We were talking about Badger, kind of the new storytelling style.
Oh, yeah. Well, then I worked out a very detailed outline, and the big inspiration for this series is making Vladimir Putin the bad guy.
That was one of the things I always loved about your work, especially in the 80s. You would take what was going on in the culture and fuse it into the book in ways that who would have imagined that Ross Perot is going to be a character in Nexus in a way?
And that he's still around. I mean,
yes.
that's honest Vooper, and he's a big character in the new series.
Was this always just something that you would do for fun, or were you making social commentary as you did these things?
Oh, a little bit of both. I think the thing about Ross Perot is he was such a character that I just envisioned him as a comic book character. It's nothing about his politics. Much respect for Ross Perot. It's just that he was such a we exaggerated all his features, of course, the Texan drawl and the sense of entitlement. But he's just a fun character to write.
Out of all your characters, which is the one that you enjoy writing the most, and which is the one that's the hardest to write?
Well, I enjoy writing Josh Pratt the most. That's the biker character, and I'm starting a 5th novel right now. But Nexus and Badger, of course, are my children, and I'm very proud of them, and I'm always happy to work on them. I have a lot more Badger I would like to do, but in the market right now, the sales are so sucky. I mean, we're hanging on at the bottom of the top 300 comics, and I've talked to retailers, and they say sales are down, and one of the main reasons the sales are down is because the big two are sucking up all the oxygen, the title after title after title, even though their sales are dropping like rocks, too. DC, I think it's down to like 20%, and I can't comment because I don't read the comics, but I do see what other people are saying on Facebook about the comics, and all I can say is they're not getting what they want. They're not happy with the new comics for the most part.
And you had a very similar situation in the 80s. I remember one of the reasons First was created was kind of to sue Marvel for flooding the market. How did you, when you were at First, what were the things that you did as kind of a creator to kind of set yourself apart?
Well, nothing. I just worked my own little field, you know. I had Badger and Nexus, and those were my things, and I knew what I had to do with them. I never worked on setting myself apart. I just tried to write the best stories I could.
As First became popular and Nexus and Badger became kind of well-known for non-Marvel and DC books, you were actually hired at both DC and Marvel at the same time for very different series.
That's true.
And the first thing I wanted to ask is you did the reboot of Flash after Crisis on Infinite Earths. What was the process for you being brought in for that, and what were the things that you brought to the table? Because it was a very, very different character than the Flash who had been around since 1956.
Well, Mike Gold phoned and asked me if I would like to write the Flash, and of course I said that'd be great. And I had one terrific idea, which was that the Flash, who expends so much energy flying around the world at hypersonic speeds, would have to consume enormous amounts of food just to get the energy to keep going. And that was my main conceit. But after a while, I didn't know what to do with the character. Today I would. You know, I wish I hadn't dropped it, but we all have regrets. But after 13 issues, I said, Mike, I just don't know what to do with this character. I'm going to have to give him up. And he said, that's fine.
And the book you did at Marvel was The Punisher.
Yeah.
And in many ways, you know, Stephen Grant kind of set the template for the character with that miniseries. But when you came on The Punisher, you were there as the character rose to popularity to where it was as popular as Wolverine at the time. How was the process of getting on Punisher, and what was your mindset as you started to write the character?
Well, Carl Potts asked me to write The Punisher on the basis of the Badger, and my mindset was very simple. I treated it as a straight crime story. There were no superheroes, there was no magicians or spaceships or aliens. It was the Punisher versus the scum of the earth. And that went on for 2 or 3 years until Carl got booted upstairs and I got a new editor, and then we started doing gimmicks. I don't know if you remember the plain brown paper wrapper cover.
Yes.
Yeah, and to my everlasting horror, we made Punisher black. Was not my idea; it was the editor's idea. But we did it, and it was shocking at the time. But today, of course, it's not so shocking. I mean, why can't Idris Elba play the Punisher? Why can't Idris Elba play everyone?
Well, and Benedict Cumberbatch should play everybody else.
Yeah, right.
That's the problem with when fans get in their head. It's like, oh, I like this guy. He should play everyone. Yeah. The Punisher was, as everyone knows, based on, but not legally, And there was a huge raft. There were tons of these men's adventure series like The Executioner in the 70s.
Uh-huh.
Did you feel the need to kind of make sure that you went away from that, or did you want to honor that tradition of those books?
Well, I never feel the need to. I try not to let other work affect my work. And I had a direction that I wanted to go, and so I wasn't worried about comparisons. Although I had read a couple of Executioner novels by Mac Bowen. I had read them years before. But, I mean, there was nothing new there. Everybody knew it was based on The Executioner. But I didn't have a problem because I was telling my stories, and I try to be as original as possible. And because of that, I don't think anyone's ever going to accuse me of ripping anyone else off.
Nope. That was one of the things I enjoyed about The Punisher, was it always seemed like it was fresh ideas. And the other thing about The Punisher that you seemed to grasp was the Punisher himself can't change. So you have to make his antagonists the ones who are interesting.
Well, The Punisher is also very interesting because right away I saw this guy as a guilt-ridden Catholic. And of course he is. I mean, Frank Castle, that's the name changed from Castiglione when the family was in Sicily. The guy's Italian by background. And of course he was steeped in the church growing up. So I think I brought in that element of Catholic guilt, and that was a new element that hadn't been there before.
And what was it like being a writer on that as this book is exploding and it's all right, we're going to have another Punisher book. All right, we're going to have a third Punisher book. Okay, we're going to have a new Punisher prestige format book or a graphic novel every few weeks. Were those offered to you, or were you just kind of thought of as, okay, you write this book and then this person will do this one, and so on and so on?
Oh, no, we got to do a lot of stuff there. I wrote many issues of the War Journal, and we put out a handful of graphic novels. The best one, I think, is Intruder. It was illustrated by Bill Reinhold. But as far as it exploding, I mean, this is small potato stuff. It's not like I'm getting $1 million to write this stuff. The royalties, when they came in, they were nice, but it wasn't earth-shattering, and I never had the sense that I was riding some huge wave. I was just doing my job.
Well, as someone who was working in comics retail at the time, we could not keep the book on the shelf.
Well, I'm glad to hear that.
We really could not keep the book on the shelf. And one of the things that I did was I would put it next to Nexus and Badger and guide people to those, because I really felt that Punisher was one side of you, but it always felt to me like Nexus and Badger, as you said, were your babies. And there was never a time when it felt like Nexus and Badger weren't important.
Yep.
As you saw First was starting to kind of run out of steam, was there a sense for you to kind of wrap things up on those books?
No, there's no end. There's no end in sight. As long as there is a market, I will continue to produce stories. And Dude and I are expecting, we've already planned 2 more years of adventures for Nexus. And I have a number of proposals in at first, but they're sucking air like every other small publisher right now. So they're holding off on any new projects. We'll see what happens this summer.
You talked about when you worked in the 80s, you would actually draw the pages out, and now you say you're working in a different style. What is that? What is the style you use now? You talked about outlining.
Yeah. All right. The first thing I do is I get a notepad, a notebook, and I sit down with my pen and I mention a few of the highlights of the story, whatever comes to me first, the elements. And then I try to pin down the characters. I try to pin down the conflict. Whenever I teach kids how to write, my first question is, what is your story about? What's it about? And you have to tell me what the story is about as succinctly and in as an exciting manner as possible. Like Helmet had, they say, well, what's it about? And I say, Nazi biker zombies. And even though that's just 3 words and doesn't begin to indicate the depth of characterization or the struggles of the characters, people's eyes light up. Oh, yeah, because that's a genre they can recognize. Now, some of my other stories are not as easy to explain. So I always work up an outline, and it's an outline that's designed to be read by others and get them excited in the story. And because of that, by the time I'm ready to start writing, I know where everything is going. Almost everything. You always got to leave a little room to surprise yourself. But after I do fill up the notepad, then I go to the word processor and I work up the outline formally. You know, I write it all out. And then when that's done, when I'm happy with that, then I start writing the finished product. I know this sounds crazy, but I love it. It's all creative process to me. And when I was young, I was very impatient, and I used to poo-poo outlines. But now I have come to see the wisdom of them.
I've always heard that there are two kinds of writers. There are the explorers and there are the planners. The explorers are the guys who sit down, okay, I know my story and I'm just going to write and explore and find what happens as I go, and then I'll clean it all up later. And then there are the planners who do the outlines and everything. In your earlier days, were you more of an explorer, or did you have the set pieces in your head and okay, I need 5 pages to get here, 7 to get here, and then the rest to get to this?
Well, a little of both, actually. I think you have to have both to be a good writer. When I was drawing out the Badger Nexus stories by hand, I would also just number every page on the legal pad. You know, if it's a 22-page story, I would write 1 through 22, and then I would block out the rhythms of the story on those pages, where the climax comes, where the hero licks his wounds. A good story is like a pop song. It's got to have at least 3 chords. You got to have a tonic that sucks you in, and you've got to have a bridge that escalates the tension, and finally you have to have a hook that releases the tension. So there's a pulse and a rhythm to the story. When I draw each page out, I can see it, and I can plan 5 pages ahead, but I also got that little chart which may show 22 numbers on one page, and on each of those numbers I make little notes on what's happening in that page. Like sometimes it'll be just fight, fight, fight. But then you get back to other events.
You've talked about music, and music has always kind of played a big part in your writing and in your stories. But honestly, I don't know much about you as a musician. Are you a musician? Have you played, or is it more of a hobby?
Well, it's not a hobby, and I'm not a musician. I don't play anything, despite my mother forcing me to take piano lessons as a child. But I have a great passion for music. I love it. I like to hear it live. I like to play it on record. Certain musicians are just sublime to me, and I think that listening to music is as good a way to waste time as any. And it probably staves off Alzheimer's. I don't know.
And one of the things that comes out of music is one of your, and I hope you take this as the compliment it's meant, one of your amazingly wonderful failures was sonic disruptors.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, as I'm reading it, it really felt like it started as one story and then you explored. Could you talk a little about the construction of that maxi series?
Well, yeah, that was a failure. That was a failure of me to plan ahead. I should have outlined the whole thing. The good news is I've picked the character up and I've resolved the whole thing. It's in a new series called Ethel, which Mike Kilgore is drawing. I don't know where we're going to put it. We might just put it up on the net and see who bites. But I go back to Sonic Explorers in this new series and round out the story and make it whole and bring it all back full circle.
I remember reading each issue as it came out. Again, I was working retail, and it was some stories you can predict. You know the beats. This one I could never predict the beats, and I thought it was interesting in that it would almost go right angles against your expectations.
Well, yeah, I couldn't predict the beats either.
So was that planned? Was that as you sat down to write it? This is what I'm going to do, or was it?
That was as unplanned as it comes.
Okay. So when they said you have 12 issues, you didn't really know. You just said, okay, I could fill 12 issues.
Sure.
Okay. One of the things that comics can't really do now that they used to do was experiment. And you would do experiments in Nexus and Badger where you would change the storytelling. And the biggest example I can think of is the Badger graphic novel, where you kind of upended a lot of things, added new characters, shifted a lot of stuff around. Was that because you felt the series needed a change, or it was just something that said, oh, this is the next step?
Which graphic novel?
I think it was called Hexbreaker.
Oh, Hexbreaker. No, that was just my attempt to do a Kung Fu movie. And in fact, I've since done a much more complete treatment of that. We do have a studio interested in Hong Kong. It's been wanting to do a Badger movie for ages. It's in limbo. It's in turnaround right now, but that was all very well planned. I mean, I was doing exactly what I wanted to do with that one. I would like first to reissue that. We'll see.
Is there any chance that, I know Nexus is being collected in these beautiful hardcovers. Is there any chance of Badger being collected in any way?
Well, IDW issued 4 volumes of the collected Badger back around 2005 or 2006, if you can track them down. But this is something I have to talk to Ken about. Ken's the head of First. And I think, as I say, it took a massive effort to get this Badger forward. My editor, Alex Wald, is eager for me to go forward with a number of other ideas I put out, including outlines for some Badger graphic novels, which I think would be terrific, but we're just going to have to wait to see what the market will do and whether he can get the money to do it.
Is there a frustration in the comic book market with you that you feel like you've got it sounds like you feel that you've improved in your writing. From reading that first issue of Badger, I'm not going to say your old work was bad, but this is a more mature kind of polished texture to your writing. Is there a frustration that you really can't seem to get something printed if it's not Batman, Justice League, or Avengers? Well,
yeah, I would like to do a lot more work in comics. Me and 300 other guys I know of who are terrific creators. But the market ain't growing. I don't know why that is. It's not like it was in the 80s.
And to me, with Facebook and Twitter and all this stuff, it seems like the marketing would be so much easier than it used to be.
Well, there are exceptions. Something like Battle Pug. Mike Norton's Battle Pug?
Yes.
Yeah. And Mike's been doing that online. It's just gorgeous. And because he had a good following, I think Dark Horse agreed to publish the books. There are now 4 of those books out. They've changed the format because it's landscape format now as opposed to portrait because it appeared first on the internet, and the screens we look at are landscape shape. And I know of other works that have been summoned forth from the internet to become paper books.
And the new Nexus is a very, very different format.
Well,
I can't even imagine how it's going to be. I don't think you can publish it as a book and still maintain the beauty of the art unless the book is a true coffee table book, and by that I mean it's an actual coffee table.
Well, that's the plan. I mean, these new Nexus pages, they are about they're about 30 inches tall and 20 inches wide, so they're enormous. I mean, they're bigger than maybe you could get some poster flats that would hold them, but they're enormous. I'm looking at one right now. But there are coffee table books that big, and he could always shrink the art down a little. I mean, it doesn't have to be the size of a flying carpet like it is. But I know his plan is to publish this full size eventually.
When you started writing the novels, what was your process to say, you know what, there's this electronic book thing going on. Why don't I figure out how to get into that? What was your process for doing that?
Well, I just started writing them, and then my wife Ann formatted them, and we went up to Amazon. I don't know, what is it called, Amazon Direct or something, and we could self-publish on Amazon. But we weren't getting many hits, and the books needed heavy editing. You know, there were a lot of glitches and typos in them, and neither one of us. Well, I could do it, but anyhow, I became friends with Kevin J. Anderson, who writes the Dune novels, and Kevin is out here. He's a good Colorado boy. In fact, he comes from Wisconsin, not far from where I was born. And Kevin started his own imprint, Wordfire Press. And that's where I've been publishing, and most notably my two novels, Scorpio and Whack Job. Scorpio is a horror story about a ghost who only appears under a blazing sun. And Whack Job is a science fiction novel about alien invasion and spontaneous human combustion. And they're both guaranteed to make your head explode. Next month he's going to publish Banshees, which is my big fat horror novel about a satanic rock band that comes back from the dead.
I'm looking forward to that. You've been talking about it on Facebook a lot.
Well,
Do you find that
Facebook a long time?
Do you find Facebook is really good at getting the word out for your work, or do you have to kind of push a little harder in different areas?
It's very useful, and I've met a lot of great people on Facebook, and a lot of people have been kind to me and have helped me spread the word. But Facebook is funny, you know. They're always changing the rules and the regulations. They're always trying to get a buck out of you too. Now, just promote this page, because you know that if you have 5,000 friends, only 500 are seeing your posts, because Facebook just won't share them. They say, okay, you know, if you want everybody to see your posts, divvy up. Show us the money.
Yes, I know that quite well. And the problem I have with Twitter is it's so ephemeral. You'll post something, and within 20 minutes, it's, you know, way down the page and it's gone.
Yeah.
One podcaster I know says that he will, every hour, when he drops a new episode, he'll post it every hour. And he will get more impressions than he will annoy people with that. And I think with writers and artists and comic creators and things like that, it's almost the same thing where, yep, just letting you know, I've got this coming out. Just letting you know I've got this coming out. And you did that with Badger really well. I got to know that Badger was coming out months ago, and I was very happy. Badger's one of my favorite books. In fact, in college, I had a group of friends, and we all called each other Larry. Well, I want to thank you for the time. I want to thank you also for all the stories you've written. You're one of the comic creators who, if I saw you were writing a book and I didn't know anything about it, I'd buy it anyway.
Oh, well, thank you, sir.
And like I said, when I worked in comics retail, pushed your stuff because I wanted more of it. It was a very selfish thing for me to do.
Well,
but I want to
really very kind.
I want to thank you for giving me the time. And folks, go out and buy Badger #1. It's at comic shops. If they don't have it, grab the retailer by the shirt and say, hey, I want my Badger. You can order it. It's from First Comics. Diamond's got them in stock. Go get them.
Great. Thank you, Cory.
And there you go, an interview with Mike Baron. He's done a lot of stuff. There's a lot of great books out there by him. To read more, as I said, go to your comic shop, get Badger #1. It is a perfect first issue in that everything you need is there. The character's kind of being restarted. Dark Horse is reprinting the Nexus in what they call omnibuses. Their omnibuses are different from Marvel's. Marvel's are great big hardcovers, but the Dark Horse are small trade paperbacks. Are a little smaller than comic size, and they have about 450 pages, so they reprint a whole bunch of stuff. They've reprinted the original first run as well as some of the miniseries after. Just go ahead, pick those up. You're going to enjoy them. His Punisher run has been printed in Essentials. His Star Wars stuff is actually being reprinted now by Marvel. There's a lot of good Mike Baron stuff you can go out there and read. Every podcast has ads. We have ours. Here they are. Believe it or not, kids, this silliness has actual real sponsors. Our first sponsor is Graze.com. Graze gives you healthy snacks sent to your house. You can have them delivered weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, and your first box is free if you use the code CORYS3R5B. Our second sponsor is Bombas. Bombas socks are some of the best socks in the world, and remember, for every pair you buy, they donate a pair to a homeless shelter or other worthy cause. Just go to bombas.gotocloud.org/SF30. That's right, those are our ads. Go check out our sponsors. Episode 50. Wow, episode 50. I've done 50 of these. This is kind of a side project to Crazy Comics and Stories, which is our weekly podcast. It comes out every Monday, where myself and my best friend in the whole wide world, Joe, and once in a while our friend Jen Wicked will show up, and we talk comics. We talk stories of working in retail. We review a comic every week. We talk about what we're freaking about, what we're geeking on. We have a lot of fun. I also have a novelcast over at novels.solitairerose.com. I am recording my novels in audiobook form. Every 2 weeks there's a new episode. The first novel, which was called After the Fall, is set 5 years after civilization has fallen under a zombie apocalypse. And we have a group of survivors and how they are dealing with a world where human beings are no longer the top of the food chain. How did they survive? How does life go on 5 years after civilization has fallen apart? The next novel starts next week, believe it or not. Next week. It is called All In. It is a coming-of-age novel. It is a very different novel from the zombie novel. It's a comedy novel. It's a love story. It's a coming-of-age story, and it's all about a guy who just wants to be a tournament poker player. So I hope you'll tune in for that. I also have a new podcast that I just started this year, the Weekly News Update. I did a Weekly News Update parody via email. It became quite popular, and then about 10 years ago, it became more work than fun, so I dropped it. It is now back as a podcast. It's at weeklynewsupdate.solitairerose.com. The Solitaire Rose podcasting network is growing. We will be adding more shows this year. Also, last week, a new episode of Solo Joe. So Joe's now got 2 episodes out. If he keeps at it, he might catch up eventually. He won't catch up eventually. So there you go. There's all sorts of stuff. We got the next episode will be a retrospective of the last season of Doctor Who. After that, I promise I will complete the Kirby stuff. I promise I will get back to the EC stuff. There are other ideas I want to do with Solitaire Rose Radio. I am planning on doing one every other week, but as you know, things get in the way. So if I miss an episode or two, I'm sorry. We've also got some more interviews coming up. There's a lot going on. I want you to stay involved. I'll be back next time with more stories.